They say the Wyoming wind can strip a soul bare. That morning, Jessie Harper barely recognized the world outside her windshield. The record-breaking blizzard had passed, but its legacy was everywhere. Drifts taller than pickup trucks, splintered fence posts, icicles like daggers dangling from every porch. The radio crackled on the passenger seat, the sheriff's office still issuing advisories. Non-essential travel suspended. Stay indoors unless absolutely necessary. But Jessie was already halfway down the service road, snow chains clanking, her battered Ford Ranger rattling like a tin can full of bolts. She'd promised herself this was just a check-in on the wildlife. Nothing heroic, nothing stupid. But every mile away from town seemed to pull her deeper into something she couldn't name. The last 2 days had been a blur of rescue calls, desperate ranchers, and stranded antelope. Jessie, 24 and already considered half crazy by some locals, refused to let fear or fatigue win. "Every life counts," she muttered, remembering the words her father once said, "even if you're the only one who believes it." As she rounded a bend past the wind-burned cottonwoods, something caught her eye, a flash of movement against the blinding white. She braked hard, boots crunching encrusted snow as she stepped out, breath fogging in the cold. There, just off the fence line, a wild Mustang mare stood, nostrils flaring, mane tangled with ice, her body angled protectively over a shape barely visible beneath the drift. Jessie's heart stuttered. The foal, maybe a few weeks old at most, lay motionless, half buried, legs twisted awkwardly. Jessie approached slowly, arms raised in a gesture of peace. The mare stamped her hooves, ears pinned back, but didn't run. "Easy, girl. I'm here to help." Jessie's words sounded foolish in the howling wind. Up close, the foal looked gone. Eyes closed, lips blue, chest unmoving. The mother nudged her with desperate urgency, nickering softly, as if begging Jessie to fix the unfixable. She knelt, gloved fingers trembling as she pressed them to the foal's chest. No movement. No warmth. Jessie's breath caught in her throat. A sob or a curse, she wasn't sure. "No, not like this," she whispered, blinking back tears that stung in the cold. The radio crackled to life. "Harper, you out there? You're not supposed to be on range roads. Turn back, repeat, turn back. Visibility's dropping, and we can't get to you if you get stuck." Officer Ramirez, all business, voice tight with worry. Jessie hesitated, thumb pressed to the radio button. "Copy that, officer. I'm just west of Cottonwood Creek. Found a mare and a foal, foal's down. I'll document and move on." Ramirez's answer was quick, stern. "Don't touch the animals, Harper. Let nature take its course. Protocol's clear. Document, GPS tag, and leave." Protocol. Jessie closed her eyes, jaw clenched. She'd logged dozens of losses this season already. Coyotes, calves, a half-frozen fawn she'd watched fade by sunrise. "Not this one," she said. And in that moment, she didn't care if the radio was still on. The foal's mother whinnied sharply, pawing at Jessie's boot. It felt like an accusation, a plea. Jessie slid her arms under the foal, grunting with effort. The tiny body heavier than she'd expected, cold as riverstone. She cradled the limp foal against her chest, staggering toward the truck. The mare followed, pacing, then veered away at the last second, torn between fear and hope. Inside the cab, Jessie laid the foal across the passenger seat, slammed the door, and turned the heater on full blast. Her hands shook as she reached for her phone, snapping quick photos for the BLM report. Her mind already rehearsing what she'd say if she was caught. "Just logging a fatality," she'd claim. "Didn't interfere." But in truth, her chest burned with the risk. She could lose her volunteer status, face a fine, maybe worse. But as the truck rattled down the frozen road toward her cabin, all Jessie could think about was the stubborn, silent promise she'd made to every animal she'd ever found in trouble. If I can help, I have to try. The drive felt endless. Every minute mattered. The foal didn't stir, didn't breathe, didn't offer a single sign of life. Jessie's mind spiraled. What if it's already too late? What if this was nothing but a selfish act, risking her job, her safety for a lost cause? She pictured Officer Ramirez's disappointed face, the BLM paperwork, her own name crossed off every wildlife volunteer list for miles. But beneath all the fear, there was something else. A fierce, irrational hope, a belief that maybe, just maybe, the rules didn't know everything. That sometimes science and protocol had to take a back seat to compassion. The blizzard's scars were everywhere, but Jessie refused to let this little life become just another number in a report. Snow still fell in wild, stinging flurries as she skidded into her driveway. She carried the foal into the warmth of her cabin, heart hammering as she laid the tiny body on a pile of blankets. The room was silent, but for the ticking clock and Jessie's quick, shaky breaths. She knelt beside the foal and whispered, "You're not alone. Not today." And as she began her frantic, desperate effort to fight back against the cold, Jessie Harper had no idea that this was just the beginning, that a single act of defiance would soon test the limits of science, courage, and the wildest kind of hope. Inside the little log cabin, Jessie Harper moved with a focus that bordered on frantic. The Mustang foal, still and icy as marble, lay on a patchwork of old quilts she'd stacked in front of the fireplace. The wood stove roared, but the room still shivered with the blizzard's memory. Jessie pressed a hand to the foal's slender chest, willing herself to feel something, anything, beyond the numbing cold. Nothing. Then, almost by accident, she pressed her ear against the foal's ribcage and a flutter. Barely there, barely real. She jerked upright, heart pounding. Oh God, wait, she's not gone, she's not gone. Jessie fumbled with her phone, hands shaking. Who could help? There was no vet for miles, and Officer Ramirez would only remind her she was breaking rules just by bringing the foal inside. Her mind leapt to Mrs. Carson, her neighbor, nearly 80, but with a reputation for stubbornness and a soft spot for anything with hooves or paws. She dialed, breathless. "Mrs. Carson, it's Jessie. Please, can you come over? It's an emergency." "No, I didn't break my leg, but, well, I may have broken a rule or two. There's a foal. I think she's still alive, but just barely." Within minutes, Mrs. Carson arrived, bundled in her ancient green parka, gray hair peeking from under a knit hat, boots still dusted with fresh snow. She sized up the situation with a single glance, lips pressed into a thin, determined line. "Let's get moving, child. Fetch hot water bottles, all you got. I'll grab the blankets." Jessie raced for the kitchen, filling every bottle and thermos she owned with steaming water, then wrapped them in towels before laying them gently beside the foal. Mrs. Carson tucked woolen blankets over and around, then pulled off her mittens. Hands, skin to skin's best if you can stand it. Jessie shed her gloves, pressing her palms against the foal's chest, feeling the terrible cold leaching into her bones. Outside, the snow had faded to a whisper. Inside, time slowed to a crawl. Jessie and Mrs. Carson worked in shifts, rubbing the foal's legs, rotating the hot bottles, whispering nonsense just to keep the air from filling with dread. Hours slipped by. 2, then 3, then 5. Jessie's own body ached, her eyes burned, but she refused to look away, refused to give up, not even as Mrs. Carson, voice soft, suggested, "You know, sometimes all we can do is try our best. It might not be enough." But Jessie shook her head. "If she's fighting, I'm fighting. At some point in the deep of night, with the fire burning low and the window panes frosted, Jessie logged onto her battered old laptop, opening the official wildlife rescue form. Under Incident Report, she typed with a trembling finger, "Found Mustang foal, presumed deceased after blizzard, per protocol logged as fatality. GPS tagged, photographic record attached." She stared at the words, her throat tight. A small, guilty voice inside reminded her this was a lie by omission. She forced herself to press send. "I'll fix it later," she promised the universe, "if she makes it." Outside, coyotes howled. The only light came from the fire and a flickering lamp. Mrs. Carson drifted in and out of sleep on the old couch, wrapped in a faded quilt. Jessie set an alarm on her phone, making sure she woke every 30 minutes to check on the foal. Each time her heart sank. Still no movement, still no sound, just the faintest flutter of a pulse. It was just before dawn, that cold blue-gray hour where the world seems frozen between night and day, when something shifted. Jessie, half dreaming, sat slumped against the hearth, her hand resting on the foal's neck. Suddenly, she felt a tremor. Small, but there. The foal's sides expanded, then shuddered, a gasp escaping her lips. Jessie bolted upright, wild hope crashing through exhaustion. "Mrs. Carson!" She moved. "She's breathing." The older woman blinked awake, squinting through her glasses. Jessie leaned in, willing the foal to move again. The little chestnut filly opened her eyes, cloudy and confused, but alive. She blinked, nostrils flaring, then tried and failed to lift her head. Jessie's own eyes filled with tears. "Hey, little one. Welcome back." Mrs. Carson pressed a gentle hand to Jessie's shoulder. "Well, that's a miracle if I've ever seen one." The relief was so intense, Jessie nearly collapsed beside the foal, brushing her matted mane, her voice breaking. "You made it! You really made it!" Mrs. Carson gave a soft chuckle, half in awe, half in warning. "Surviving the night's only half the battle, dear. Now you got to keep her going. She's weak as a newborn lamb, and her mother's out there somewhere, frantic, I bet." Jessie nodded, wiping her eyes, but her mind was already moving ahead. She would need to find the right formula, coax the foal to drink, keep her warm, and somehow avoid the attention of the authorities for a little while longer. But in that moment, none of it seemed impossible. The hardest part, the first impossible night, was over. She touched the foal's forehead, murmuring softly, "I'm going to call you Hope. That's what you gave me tonight." Hope blinked, then nuzzled weakly at Jessie's hand, her breath fogging the air. Outside, the sky was just beginning to brighten, the world painted in delicate shades of pink and gold. For the first time since the blizzard, Jessie felt the possibility of something good breaking through all that cold and darkness. She didn't know what the coming days would bring, what rules she'd have to break, what dangers she'd have to face, or what miracles she might still need. But as the sun crept over the snowy hills and the foal's eyes stayed open, Jessie let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, hope could be enough. Daylight had barely spread across the Wyoming hills when Jessie realized just how monumental the task ahead of her truly was. Hope. The name felt both fragile and powerful as she whispered it. Was alive, but just barely. Her legs still wouldn't hold her weight. Every breath the little Mustang filly took was shallow and hesitant, as if each one was a choice, not a certainty. Jessie hovered anxiously, torn between triumph and terror. Every moment felt like it might tip either way. The cabin smelled of wet horse and wool, the air heavy with anxiety and wood smoke. Jessie kept the fire stoked and the room warm, checking Hope's pulse every half hour, as if the filly's tiny heart might slip away the second she looked away. She took quick showers, never letting herself be gone for more than a few minutes, afraid the next absence might be the one when hope faded for good. She didn't want to admit she was in over her head. But the truth was, she had never rescued a wild animal in such dire condition, and never one this young. Out of desperation, she called Mrs. Carson again before sunrise. "You ever try to feed a foal that's never tasted a bottle?" she asked, her voice already raw from worry and lack of sleep. Mrs. Carson arrived with an old plastic baby bottle, a battered can of powdered mare's milk substitute, and her matter-of-fact calm. "Warm it up, slow and steady. Don't force her. Let her get a feel for the taste." She watched, arms crossed, as Jessie crouched next to Hope, cradling the filly's head in her lap and coaxing the rubber nipple to her lips. The first few tries, Hope only snorted and turned away, weakly shaking her head. Jessie's heart clenched with each refusal. Finally, just as Jessie was about to break down, Hope latched on, suckling tentatively. The relief was dizzying, tears streaming down Jessie's cheeks as she whispered, "Good girl, that's it, you're safe here." Mrs. Carson's lips twitched in a rare smile. "She'll make it, if you let her go at her own pace. Stubborn runs deep in the wild ones." The next days bled together in a blur of vigilance and exhaustion. Jessie kept careful notes in her battered leather-bound journal. Each entry felt like a prayer, a tally of tiny miracles. Day 1, Hope drank 2 ounces, lifted her head. Day 2, tried to stand, collapsed, but didn't panic. Day 3, nickered softly when I changed her blankets. She recorded every milestone, no matter how small, and clung to them like life rafts. By the end of the second day, Hope finally managed to get her hooves under her, trembling with effort, but standing for a full 5 seconds before collapsing back into the blankets. Jessie whooped with joy, startling both Mrs. Carson and the cat, who had taken to watching the proceedings with suspicious fascination from atop the woodpile. Still, the shadow of what she'd done, the rules she'd bent, the danger of discovery, hovered around Jessie like the last chill of the storm. She knew she couldn't hide Hope forever. It was only a matter of time before someone from the Bureau of Land Management came calling. That's why, on the 3rd morning, Jessie forced herself to call Officer Ramirez and come clean. Ramirez picked up after a few rings, his voice gravelly with fatigue. "Harper, what's going on out there?" Jessie hesitated, then spoke quickly before she could lose her nerve. "I found that Mustang foal during the blizzard. She wasn't gone. Not really. I brought her in. I've been caring for her. She's not out of the woods. But she's fighting." There was a long silence on the other end. Jessie's heart thudded. "You know what the rules say, right?" Ramirez finally said, but his voice was softer than she expected. "You're supposed to let nature take its course." "I know," Jessie said quietly, "but sometimes the rules aren't enough." Another pause. Then Ramirez sighed, the sound crackling through the line. "All right, log it officially. I'll file the incident form. Say you're fostering until we figure it out. But this stays between us for now. Don't get yourself in trouble, and don't get attached." Too late for that, Jessie thought, but said nothing. "Thank you, officer." Relief flooded her, but it was laced with worry. The BLM had the authority to seize Hope at any time. Jessie wrote the incident report truthfully this time, attaching updated photos and a timeline. She wondered what the bureaucrats in their offices would think if they saw the trembling, resilient filly who had survived a Wyoming winter by nothing more than luck and human stubbornness. As the days stretched on, Hope's strength returned little by little. Jessie marveled at her resilience. She watched Hope's first awkward steps, a few lurching paces before tumbling gently into a pile of blankets. She cheered when Hope whinnied for the first time, a sound so rough and squeaky it sounded more like a squeal. The filly began to nuzzle Jessie's hand with surprising trust, searching for warmth and safety. The bond that grew between them was subtle but undeniable. Jessie spoke to Hope constantly, narrating her actions, telling stories about her own childhood growing up on these plains. Sometimes, late at night, Jessie found herself talking to the foal as if she were a confidant, confessing her fears about the future, her grief for animals she'd lost, her hopes for a world that might be just a little kinder. Mrs. Carson visited daily, offering advice and practical support, but never interfering. She watched Jessie and Hope with a kind of wistful pride, as if remembering her own younger self. "You're doing good work, Jessie," she'd say, patting her on the back. "But don't forget, wild things belong to the wild. Your job's just to give her a fighting chance." The words echoed in Jessie's mind, bittersweet and true. For now, Hope was safe, but every day brought new challenges, and Jessie knew the hardest part was still to come. By the second week, a kind of routine settled over Jessie's cabin, though every day brought its own surprises. Hope was no longer the fragile shadow that had haunted Jessie's sleep. Now she was becoming a small force of nature in her own right. The little filly could stand for longer periods, her legs wobbly but determined. She would totter across the living room rug, investigating every corner with the wide-eyed curiosity only a survivor knows. Jessie learned quickly that caring for a wild animal was an exercise in patience and humility. The textbooks said one thing, but Hope, with her stubborn Mustang blood, often had her own ideas. At first, Hope would shy away from Jessie's hand, especially if Jessie moved too fast or spoke too loudly. So Jessie adapted. She moved slower, gentler, learning to read Hope's signals, the way her ears flicked back, or how her nostrils flared with uncertainty. Jessie soon discovered that sometimes, just sitting quietly nearby, humming an old song or reading aloud from her battered paperback, was enough to earn Hope's trust for that day. As Hope's strength returned, her intelligence became more and more apparent. One chilly afternoon, as Jessie was cleaning up, she dropped a rag on the floor. Hope sniffed it, then picked it up in her teeth and, after a few tries, nudged it over to Jessie's foot. Jessie blinked, surprised, then laughed. "You trying to help out around here?" The next day, Hope found a glove Jessie had misplaced and gently nosed it into her lap. Moments like these, small, fleeting, reminded Jessie just how remarkable this wild creature was. But it wasn't just the small acts. Hope's eyes followed Jessie with uncanny awareness. When Jessie was frustrated, wrestling with a stubborn jar lid, or fuming over a bad phone call, Hope would approach and rest her chin on Jessie's knee, as if offering quiet solidarity. Jessie started to think of their communication as a secret language, made up of glances, gestures, and quiet touches. It was deeper than words. Of course, not every moment was peaceful. One morning, as the wind rattled the windows, Hope spooked at the sound of a snowplow grinding past on the distant road. She bolted across the kitchen, knocking over a mug and nearly slipping on the tiles. Jessie had to coax her out from behind the woodpile, heart pounding as she whispered reassurances. "It's okay, Hope. You're safe. It's just the world being loud." Through it all, Mrs. Carson was a constant presence, a voice of experience and warning. One evening, after Jessie gushed about Hope's progress, Mrs. Carson leaned back in her chair, her eyes clouded with memory. "Jessie, wildness isn't something you can love out of her. You have to love her enough to let her go." Jessie understood, at least in theory. But each day Hope grew stronger. The idea of releasing her into the wild felt more impossible and more necessary. Dr. Lane, the local vet, dropped by to check on Hope and offer advice. He listened to Jessie describe Hope's milestones with a faint smile, then grew serious. She's got a good shot now, but you can't keep her here forever. The BLM won't allow it, and more importantly, she needs to learn to be wild again if she's going to survive out there. He left Jessie with a stack of reading material. Strategies for rewilding rescued foals, tips for minimizing human contact, a list of plants toxic to horses. It was a sobering reminder of what was coming. From that point on, Jessie changed her approach. She started spending less time petting Hope and more time encouraging independence. She hid treats in odd places around the cabin so Hope would have to search for them. She tossed apples across the yard and watched as Hope learned to chase after them, awkward and joyful. Jessie began leaving doors open, letting Hope wander the edge of the property, always within sight, but never leashed to her presence. At night, Jessie lay awake, her mind restless. She knew the cabin couldn't stay a sanctuary forever. In her journal, she wrote, "Every day you're a little less mine and a little more your own. That's how it should be. But it breaks my heart just the same." Sometimes Hope would nicker softly at midnight, and Jessie would get up, walk quietly to her side, and simply sit in silence until both of them felt the calm return. The world outside remained cold and uncertain, but inside the cabin, trust grew, a living thing as delicate and fierce as Hope herself. The filly learned to respond to subtle cues. The soft cluck of Jessie's tongue meant, "Follow me." A gentle tap on the window meant, "Time to come in." Jessie practiced leading Hope around the yard with nothing but a rope draped loosely around her neck, never pulling, always letting Hope decide the pace. Through all this, Jessie never let herself forget Mrs. Carson's words. One afternoon, as the sun slipped behind the hills, Mrs. Carson found Jessie standing in the field, watching Hope graze. "She's almost ready, you know," Mrs. Carson said quietly. "I know," Jessie replied, her voice tight with emotion. "But am I?" Mrs. Carson put a gentle hand on Jessie's shoulder. "Loving something wild means setting it free, not keeping it close. You gave her a second chance. That's all any of us can do." As twilight settled, Jessie watched Hope gallop clumsily across the snowy pasture, her mane catching the last gold light of day. Hope paused, looked back at Jessie, then turned to face the fading horizon, a silent promise of the freedom that waited, and the bond that would never quite break. It was a Wednesday morning that cracked open the quiet rhythm Jessie and Hope had built. The sun was barely above the horizon when Jessie's phone buzzed, jarring the peaceful cabin air. She wiped her hands on her jeans, heart skipping as she saw the caller ID, Officer Ramirez. Jessie answered with a nervous, "Hello?" Ramirez's voice came through, heavy and tired. "Jessie, you need to hear this from me, not the rumor mill. The BLM is scheduling a full roundup of the local Mustang herds next week. All horses, branded or not, will be relocated. No exceptions. They want everyone to report unregistered foals or found animals. If they find any unregistered horse at your place, it'll be sent to a holding facility. That includes Hope." The words felt like ice water. Jessie stared at the filly napping by the fire, her chest rising and falling with soft, steady breaths. "What? Why so soon? They can't just... She's barely recovered." Ramirez let out a long sigh. "You know how these things go. Too many Mustangs, not enough range. They want them off before the next weather system moves in. I wish I had better news. But you need to make a decision, Jessie. Fast." Jessie hung up, her hands shaking. She relayed the news to Mrs. Carson, who arrived minutes later, bundled up against the late winter wind. They sat at Jessie's kitchen table, mugs of black coffee steaming between them, and tried to untangle their options. "So if you keep her here, they'll take her away?" Mrs. Carson asked, her brow furrowed. Jessie nodded. "They'll treat her like any other Mustang. Ship her off to a holding pen. She'll lose everything she's learned here. And she's still so young. I don't know if she'd survive it." Mrs. Carson tapped her mug, thinking. "And if you let her go, she's got to fend for herself. Or worse," Jessie said quietly, "she gets caught up in the roundup anyway, or never finds her herd." It was a cruel, impossible fork in the road. Jessie felt trapped between two kinds of heartbreak. Giving Hope a chance at freedom but risking her life, or keeping her safe but robbing her of the wildness she was born for. Jessie knew that hiding Hope would be more than just bending the rules. If caught, she could face real charges. Her volunteer work, her future with wildlife, her reputation in the community, all of it hung in the balance. The day grew long as they debated, voices sometimes rising in frustration. Mrs. Carson, practical and unsentimental, argued for the wild. "She was born out there, Jessie. She's tough, and she's learned a lot from you. If you hold on too tight, you'll break her spirit. Let her try. It's all you can do." Jessie, fighting tears, pleaded for more time. She still trusts people too much. What if she walks right up to the roundup crew? What if she doesn't remember how to keep herself safe? Mrs. Carson's answer was gentle but firm. "Then teach her while you still can." It was a new kind of lesson. Jessie shifted her efforts, turning their daily routines into survival games. She stopped using treats from her hands and scattered them around the edge of the property, forcing Hope to rely on her nose and instincts. She banged pots together or played loud music from her phone, training Hope to startle and run from sudden noises. She practiced hiding, ducking behind trees or the shed, and only rewarding Hope when she kept her distance. At first, Hope was confused. She nickered plaintively at Jessie's coldness, missing the gentle scratches and bedtime stories. But over the next few days, a new wariness crept into her movements. She circled wider when approaching the house, eyed Mrs. Carson suspiciously, and bolted at the sound of strangers' cars. Jessie's heart ached every time Hope flinched from her, but she told herself it was for the best. Still, the pressure weighed on Jessie's shoulders. She barely slept, haunted by nightmares of BLM trucks and faceless men rounding up terrified horses. Every distant engine made her tense. Every call from Ramirez felt like a countdown. One night, after a particularly tense day, Jessie and Mrs. Carson sat in silence on the porch, wrapped in old quilts against the chill. The moon was high, painting the snow in blue and silver. Hope wandered the field beyond the fence, her silhouette stark against the frosty ground. Mrs. Carson broke the silence. "You're doing the right thing, Jessie. It hurts now, but you're giving her a real shot." Jessie's voice was barely a whisper. "What if it's not enough?" Mrs. Carson squeezed her hand. "Sometimes love means letting go before you're ready." The next morning, Jessie woke to find Hope waiting by the gate, as if sensing something was about to change. Jessie leaned against the fence, watching the filly graze, her chest tight with the weight of every choice she'd made. Hope looked back at her, eyes calm, strong, and wild. Time was running out. Jessie knew the decision couldn't be put off much longer. She would have to trust that everything she'd given Hope, every lesson, every moment of care, would somehow be enough. And as the wind picked up, rattling the bare branches and carrying the distant sound of approaching trucks, Jessie made a silent promise. She would not let fear decide Hope's fate. Whatever happened next, she would choose love, no matter how much it hurt. The final decision came quietly, as most irreversible things do. For days, Jessie and Mrs. Carson watched Hope, testing, waiting, hoping for some sign that the filly would be ready. The air in Jessie's cabin hung thick with worry and the unspoken knowledge that their time together was nearly up. Jessie found herself making excuses to stretch out little moments. One more story before bed, one more brush through Hope's tangled mane, one last handful of apples left at the edge of the property. But dawn after dawn, reality pressed in. The BLM roundup was drawing near. Jessie could feel it like a ticking clock in the pit of her stomach, its tempo accelerating each time a truck rumbled by on the highway or a new voice came on the radio. In town, rumors spread faster than the wind. Talk of helicopters, pens, government tags. Jessie forced herself to remember why she'd started this fight. Hope was never meant to belong to anyone, not even to the person who had saved her life. Mrs. Carson stopped by daily, her tone gentle but insistent. "She's as ready as she'll ever be, Jess. You've done all you can. The rest is up to her." Jessie nodded, though it felt like her heart was breaking in slow motion. She'd prepared as much as she could, scattering treats, practicing hiding, making her presence less predictable, even going so far as to spray Hope with water to simulate sudden rain or fright. Hope, in turn, had grown skittish, more independent, her wild instincts returning. Some days, she'd vanish for hours at a time, returning only when dusk colored the hills pink and purple. Still, every time Jessie glimpsed her silhouette in the field, she fought the urge to call her back, to offer comfort, to keep her for just one more night. The day of release was chosen carefully. Dr. Lane joined them that afternoon, bringing a quiet, stabilizing presence to the tension that hung in the air. He examined Hope one final time, running practiced hands down her legs and checking her eyes. "She's healthy, nervous but strong," he said. "If she finds the herd, she has a fighting chance." They picked twilight, a moment when the wild herd sometimes passed near Jessie's property, foraging along the boundary fence before melting into the hills. The plan was simple: guide Hope to the edge of the field, open the last gate, and let her decide. Jessie had rehearsed every step in her mind, but when the moment came, her hands trembled and her vision blurred. Hope wore a temporary identification band on her leg, BLM protocol, in case she was spotted by the roundup crew and needed to be traced. Jessie knelt in the grass and unclipped it, fingers lingering over the soft fur beneath. "You don't need this anymore," she whispered. Hope sniffed her hair, nickered softly, then turned her gaze toward the open pasture. Mrs. Carson and Dr. Lane stood back, offering silent support. Jessie pressed her forehead to Hope's and let the silence speak for her. The urge to cling, to beg Hope to stay, surged through her chest like a storm, but she swallowed it down and stepped back, arms falling to her sides. "Go on, girl," she said, her voice cracking. "It's time." For a moment, Hope hesitated. Her ears flicked, nose searching the wind, body tensed between safety and instinct. Jessie's breath caught. What if she didn't go? What if she turned back, refused the wild, chose captivity over freedom? But then, as if pulled by something older and deeper than anything Jessie could offer, Hope walked forward. Her stride was uneven at first, but with each step, her confidence grew. She paused at the gate, glancing back only once, her eyes shining with a strange, mature understanding. Jessie thought she saw gratitude, or perhaps it was just her own reflection in those wild eyes. And then Hope was gone, slipping through the open gate and into the growing dusk. The fading light swallowed her form as she trotted toward the distant herd, blending with the shadows and the sounds of the evening. Jessie stood rooted to the spot, tears streaming down her face, heart pounding with fear and hope in equal measure. Mrs. Carson placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You did the hardest thing, Jessie. The bravest thing." Jessie tried to speak, but the words tangled in her throat. Dr. Lane nodded, his own voice thick with emotion. "Most people never learn how to let go. You gave her a miracle and a chance." They stayed until the sky turned to velvet, listening for any sign of trouble, any scream, any frantic whinny. But there was only the wind and the faint, distant sound of horses moving across open land. Jessie wiped her face and looked at the empty field, her heart aching with both pride and loss. That night, sleep came in fits and starts. Jessie dreamed of Hope running free, leading the herd across moonlit plains, wild and fearless. She woke before dawn, the ache of goodbye still raw, but softened by the knowledge that her love had not been wasted. It had become the very force that set Hope free. As the first light crept over the horizon, Jessie stepped outside, breathing the crisp air, and whispered into the morning, "Be safe. Be wild. Remember me, if only for a little while." She knew the pain would linger, but so would the hope. And that was enough, for now. Jessie woke early the next morning, an ache settled in her chest that wouldn't quite lift. For the first time in weeks, the cabin felt empty, her hands reaching for routines that no longer made sense. No need to warm bottles or refill water buckets. No gentle wicker at the door, no wide-eyed filly standing in the kitchen, curious and bright. The silence felt heavy, as if the air itself grieved. She sat by the window watching the snowy Wyoming fields glow with the sunrise, eyes fixed on the place where Hope had disappeared into the wild the night before. The cold light painted everything sharp and blue, the world both beautiful and unforgiving. Jessie wondered where Hope was now, whether she'd found the herd or wandered alone, whether the lessons Jessie had taught her would be enough. Each possibility pulled at Jessie's heart. She was startled by the crunch of boots outside. Mrs. Carson arrived, bringing a thermos of strong coffee and a silent, understanding presence. Together they walked to the edge of the property, where Jessie had last seen Hope slip into the brush. In the daylight, Jessie could see hoofprints, small, delicate, following the curve of the fence and then veering toward the cluster of cottonwoods where the wild herd often lingered. "Want to watch?" Mrs. Carson asked gently. Jessie nodded, and together they moved quietly, ducking behind a stand of willows and kneeling in the snow. The wind stung their cheeks, but neither woman minded. In the distance, the herd grazed on dry grass poking through the snow. 20 Mustangs, their coats thick and gleaming, tails lifted to the wind. Among them, the led mare, the one Jessie remembered from that desperate morning after the blizzard, stood alert, head high, muscles coiled with authority. Then, from the far side of the brush, a chestnut form appeared. Hope. Jessie's heart leapt into her throat. Hope moved cautiously, stopping and starting, head low, ears flicked forward and back. She took a few tentative steps toward the herd, pausing to look back, as if unsure whether to advance or retreat. The led mare noticed, nostrils flaring, body shifting to shield the rest of the herd. There was a moment of utter stillness, an electric pause before the verdict of the wild. Jessie clutched Mrs. Carson's hand, knuckles white with tension. "Come on, girl," she whispered, her voice barely a breath. "You can do this." Hope stopped a dozen yards from the herd, watching, The led mare stamped her hoof, tossing her head in warning. A standoff, testing, challenging, the language of the wild. Hope lowered her head, taking one cautious step closer, then another. One of the other mares moved between them, snorting sharply, but Hope stood her ground. She didn't bolt or cry out. She waited, patient, steady. Mrs. Carson murmured, "She's showing respect. That's good." The lead mare snorted again, circling Hope with measured steps, eyes never leaving her. Hope tensed but didn't run. Jessie saw her sides flutter with shallow breaths, saw the fear and determination in her posture. The herd watched, tense and silent. Finally, the led mare reached out, touching her nose to Hope's shoulder, a gentle, fleeting gesture. Then she stepped aside. The tension shattered. Hope took a trembling breath, then moved among the other horses. A young gelding sniffed at her. A foal nipped her tail, but no one chased her off. The herd accepted her, folding her into their ranks like a prodigal returned. Jessie felt her knees weaken with relief, tears burning in her eyes. "She did it," she choked out, clutching Mrs. Carson in a fierce hug. "She made it home." For a long while, they stayed hidden in the brush, watching as Hope reacquainted herself with her own kind. She moved slowly, still tentative, but each minute she seemed to grow bolder. She nibbled at grass, trotted alongside the other fillies, even kicked up her heels in a brief, joyous burst that made the whole herd startle and bolt in a short, playful stampede. The lead mare watched with approving eyes, never far from Hope's side. Jessie felt the ache in her chest ease a little. The worry would never vanish, she knew that. But seeing Hope among the wild, a living part of something bigger, was worth every sleepless night. She realized, too, that the wild wasn't just a place or a condition. It was a choice, a set of instincts, a belonging to something untamable. She had given Hope the tools, but the rest was up to the filly and the wind and the will of the herd. After some time, the herd began to move, picking their way over the hills, Hope staying close but not clinging. Jessie watched until the last tail disappeared into the cottonwoods, then let herself cry, grief and joy mingling as they always do in moments of true release. Mrs. Carson squeezed her shoulder. "You did right by her, and she did right by herself." Jessie nodded, wiping her face, and stood in the fading sunlight. The pain of goodbye was still there, but beneath it, a quiet pride bloomed. Hope was home. The wild had accepted her, flaws, fears, and all. As they walked back to the cabin, Jessie glanced over her shoulder one last time, silently wishing Hope safety, strength, and a life as untamed as the Wyoming wind. She'd done what love required, and now the rest would be up to Hope and the wild that called her home. Spring crept quietly across the Wyoming plains, softening the snowdrifts and painting the meadows with the first green shoots. It had been weeks since Hope had rejoined her herd, but for Jessie, the days blurred together in a restless mix of relief and longing. She told herself that her role was finished, that she'd done everything she could, and now the wild had to take over. But each evening, she found herself at the edge of her property, scanning the horizon for a chestnut silhouette, listening for a whinny carried on the wind. The land itself felt different, charged with a new kind of magic. It wasn't just Jessie who sensed it. Neighbors began to talk, ranchers out repairing fences, hikers with dogs on long leashes, even the mailman who drove the back roads with a watchful eye. "Did you see that Mustang filly?" folks would ask. Chestnut coat, blaze on her forehead. She's leading the herd now, not even scared of the coyotes. Some swore she'd driven off a mountain lion by rearing up and screaming a challenge. Others claimed she could sense when a storm was coming, guiding the herd to higher ground before the clouds gathered. Stories grew, changing a little with each retelling, until Hope became something more than a horse. She was a survivor, a symbol, a local legend, and every story started the same way, with a wild foal lost in the blizzard, and a girl who dared to break the rules to save her. Jessie heard the tales at the feed store, at the diner, whispered in the aisles of the hardware store. She never claimed them, never corrected the details. Instead, she listened quietly, heart swelling with a complicated pride. She saw the change, too. A subtle shift in how people spoke about the wild horses. There was more respect now, less talk of pests and nuisance herds, more appreciation for the fierce will to survive that Hope embodied. Social media spread the legend even further. One evening, Jessie's phone pinged with a message from a friend, a blurry video of a Mustang herd, filmed at sunset, the chestnut filly standing at the front, mane shining like copper. The caption read, "Miracle on the Plains." Comments poured in, people from across the country marveling at the beauty, debating whether the filly had really survived that blizzard, offering prayers and promises to protect the Mustangs. Jessie smiled at the outpouring of love. Sometimes she wondered if Hope somehow knew how many people were rooting for her. But she never let herself expect more. After all, the wild belonged to Hope now. Still, some nights, as the sky bled orange and gold over the hills, Jessie would feel an urge, a pull she couldn't ignore. She'd grab her coat and boots, walk out to the fence line, and wait. Sometimes the wind brought only silence, the grass bending beneath the breath of dusk. Other times, though, she'd catch a glimpse, a flicker of chestnut in the distance, a shadow among the herd that made her breath hitch. The most extraordinary evenings were those when Hope returned. It was never close, never tame, just a moment of recognition at the boundary between the wild and the world Jessie called home. Hope would stop at the edge of the pasture, standing tall and proud, eyes bright with intelligence. She never came all the way to the fence, never asked for touch or treats. Instead, she'd simply meet Jessie's gaze, holding it for a long, silent moment. In those wordless exchanges, Jessie felt everything she needed to know. Hope was well, she remembered, and she was free. Each time it happened, Jessie's heart soared. She realized slowly that this was a new kind of relationship, not ownership, but kinship. Hope was no longer the scared, shivering foal in need of rescue. She was a creature of myth and memory, both wild and beloved, carrying Jessie's hope into places she could never follow. The community felt it too. More hikers left the wild herds alone, keeping their distance and picking up trash along the trails. Some neighbors even built small windbreaks or left buckets of water by the fence line during the driest days, just in case. The story of Hope became a gentle push for kindness, reminding everyone that even the wildest hearts sometimes needed a little help, and that letting go was the bravest act of all. One afternoon, Jessie spotted a family at the edge of the public land, binoculars in hand. Their little boy whispered, "Do you think we'll see the miracle horse?" Jessie smiled to herself and pointed toward the distant herd, Hope's chestnut coat shining in the sun. "Keep your eyes open," she said. "You never know when you'll witness something special." The legend grew, as legends do, outpacing the truth but never losing its heart. Jessie felt honored to be part of it, not the center but a single thread in a much larger tapestry. She continued to write, sending her observations and stories to a conservation magazine. Her words carried lessons she hoped others would hear, that miracles were possible, that compassion was powerful, and that every act of courage rippled farther than she could see. On the rarest nights, as darkness gathered and the coyotes sang, Hope would reappear one last time, standing at the far fence with her herd behind her, framed by starlight. Jessie would whisper her gratitude into the wind, feeling the wildness echo in her own heart. For Jessie, the legend was not just a story told around dinner tables or shared online. It was living proof that love, when brave enough to let go, could create miracles, and that sometimes letting go was the greatest miracle of all. The Wyoming sky glowed gold and lavender as dusk fell across the land, casting long shadows over Jessie's quiet barn. She leaned against the old wood, her hands curled around a chipped mug of coffee, eyes lost somewhere between past and present. The days were longer now. The snow melted, the wild horses just a distant flicker on the hills. Yet inside, Jessie carried every moment with hope as if it had happened only yesterday. Mrs. Carson joined her most evenings, settling onto an overturned bucket beside the tackroom door. Sometimes they sat in silence, just watching the light fade and the bats begin their nightly flight. Other nights, the air was thick with words, memories, laughter, regrets too tender to touch. "It's funny," Jessie mused one evening, her voice low. "I spent so much time trying to save her. I forgot how much she saved me." Mrs. Carson nodded, tracing circles on the rim of her mug. "We never know how deep the river runs until we wade out, do we?" As the days passed, Jessie found herself reflecting more deeply on everything that had happened. Her own stubbornness, her need to break the rules, the aching risk of loving something wild and fragile. She realized that caring for Hope had changed her more than she'd ever expected. The routines, the worry, the laughter and heartbreak, all of it had chipped away at her old defenses, teaching her a kind of humility she hadn't known she needed. She'd been afraid at first that the story would end with loss, that letting Hope go would leave her emptier than before, that she'd spend the rest of her life haunted by what-ifs and regrets. But the truth, Jessie learned, was more complicated and more beautiful. The pain of saying goodbye lingered, yes, but it became softer with time, shaped into something almost sweet by the knowledge that she'd done the right thing. Dr. Lane visited one evening, leaning on the fence beside her. "You should write this down," he urged gently. "People need to hear it. The real story, not just the legend. What you did, what you learned. It matters, Jessie. It matters a lot." Jessie hesitated, not sure if anyone would care about the details. The nights awake with worry, the fear of the BLM, the trembling hope that filled every sunrise. But Dr. Lane only smiled, seeing her reluctance. "The best kind of love is the one that puts another's freedom first, even when it hurts. That's what people need to hear." So Jessie began to write, her words slow at first, then pouring out in a flood. She wrote about the blizzard and the rescue, about the way Hope's eyes had looked the morning after she'd survived the impossible cold. She wrote about Mrs. Carson's wisdom, Dr. Lane's steady hands, the risk and the guilt, and the secret joy of doing something no one else dared. She wrote, most of all, about the letting go, the hardest lesson she'd ever learned. "You can't own a miracle," Jessie typed one night, the words echoing in her mind. "You can only be part of it for a while. You can only give what you have, and trust the rest to the wild." As she wrote, Jessie found herself remembering every small victory, Hope's first whinny, her wobbly steps, the silent language they'd developed, the shared nights by the fire. She remembered the terror, too, the phone calls from Ramirez, the rumors of the roundup, the awful weight of making the decision to set Hope free. And yet, in the remembering, Jessie found healing. She realized the story wasn't just about a girl and a horse. It was about risk and courage, and the willingness to face the unknown for something bigger than herself. It was about loving with open hands instead of closed fists, about learning to honor what can never truly be tamed. Sometimes, when the pain of loss crept in, late at night, or when she glimpsed a chestnut shape on the horizon, Jessie would find herself out in the barn, sitting in the hush of twilight. She'd run her fingers along the stall Hope had slept in, remembering the warmth and the hope that had filled those short, wild weeks. In those moments, Mrs. Carson would join her, sometimes with a thermos of tea, sometimes with nothing but a silent presence. "I thought letting her go would break me," Jessie admitted one night, her voice catching. "But it didn't. It just changed me. I think I'm stronger for it." Mrs. Carson smiled, her eyes gentle. "That's the truth, Jessie. We don't get to keep what we love most. But if we're lucky, we get to see it grow. And if we're wise, we let it go when it's time." As Jessie's article took shape, she realized the lesson was not just about hope, or even about wild horses. It was about all the things that matter: love, loss, the fierce beauty of freedom, the humility to accept what we cannot control. She wrote for herself, but also for the girl she'd once been, afraid of letting go, convinced that love meant holding on no matter the cost. One evening, just as the sun dipped behind the hills, Jessie stepped outside to find the herd grazing far off in the fading light. She didn't try to approach, didn't call out. Instead, she stood in the dusk, feeling the wildness settle in her chest like a promise. She realized she would always carry Hope's story, not as a wound, but as a kind of gift. Proof that miracles happen when you're brave enough to risk your heart and wise enough to let it go. Sometimes, when the world was quiet and dusk stretched wide across the Wyoming plains, Jessie would hear Hope's story echoing back to her. The legend had grown beyond anything she could have imagined. Friends, strangers, even children in neighboring counties knew the tale of the wild foal who'd survived the blizzard and the stubborn girl who had risked everything to give her a second chance. It was humbling and a little surreal to know that her own pain and courage had become part of something so much larger, a thread woven into the tapestry of wildness and hope. Yet, for Jessie, the true miracle was never in the headlines or the online stories. It lived in the quieter spaces, the choices made in secret, the moments of uncertainty, the trust that grew between her and a creature who belonged to the wind. That miracle, she realized, was not a singular event, but a series of small, courageous acts. Scooping the frozen filly out of the snow, breaking the rules, letting herself love without any promise of return, and hardest of all, stepping back when the time came to let hope claim her freedom. Jessie found herself reflecting often on those lessons, especially as spring deepened and the herd grew more elusive. On her walks along the fence line, she would sometimes catch a fleeting glimpse of hope, strong, beautiful, and utterly wild. Those moments were rare and never guaranteed. There were weeks when the herd moved on, seeking new grass and safer ground, and Jessie would wonder if she would ever see hope again. But always, just as her doubt threatened to win, she'd catch the flash of a chestnut mane at sunset, or spot a familiar silhouette standing proud on the ridge. Each sighting filled Jessie with a bittersweet joy. She learned to carry the ache and the gratitude side by side. That was the lesson hope had left her. Real love wasn't about possession or certainty. It was about presence, about giving all you could, and then trusting the wild to take care of the rest. It was, as Mrs. Carson had always said, about being brave enough to set something free, even when it hurt more than anything else. Jessie's story reached far and wide after her article was published in the conservation magazine. Letters arrived from all over, some from young volunteers inspired to help their own local wildlife, some from old cowboys who admitted they'd never looked at wild horses quite the same way, and others from people who simply wanted to say thank you for reminding them that hope is worth fighting for. Jessie tried to reply to every letter, knowing that the miracle was not just hope's survival, but the ripple effect of compassion and courage spreading through so many lives. She was invited to speak at a local school, standing in front of a crowd of curious faces. She told the students, "True courage isn't about never being afraid. It's about caring enough to do the right thing, even when it's hard. Sometimes that means breaking the rules. Sometimes it means letting go. But every act of kindness, every risk you take for something you believe in, matters more than you can imagine." The children listened with rapt attention, and Jessie saw in their wide eyes the possibility for more miracles, more stories just waiting to unfold. The wild itself seemed to change too. Inspired by Hope's story, the community supported new protections for the Mustang herds, started organizing trash cleanups along the range, and even lobbied local officials to improve fencing and water access during the driest months. Jessie felt proud, but she also felt humbled. All she'd really done was listen to her heart and refuse to let fear dictate her choices. She and Mrs. Carson kept up their evening rituals, sharing coffee and stories as the sun set over the pasture. Sometimes Dr. Lane would join them, offering updates on rescued animals or reading aloud letters from other wildlife volunteers. The three would sit together in companionable silence, each holding their own memories of hope, each understanding the price and the gift of loving something wild. One night, as a thunderstorm rolled in, Jessie found herself standing at the edge of the field, rain drumming on her jacket. Lightning flashed, illuminating the distant herd. For a split second she saw Hope, larger now, muscles rippling, mane tangled with wildflowers. The sight was gone as quickly as it had come, but Jessie felt a peace settle in her chest. She whispered into the storm, "Thank you for letting me be a part of your story, for teaching me what freedom really means." As the months slipped by, Jessie's life continued. She took on new rescue cases, mentored young volunteers, and kept writing. But hope was always with her, a presence in her dreams, a reminder in the hush of twilight, a lesson written on her heart. She knew that miracles weren't reserved for the lucky or the bold. They belonged to anyone willing to love bravely, risk loss, and choose to let go. In her final article for the magazine, Jessie wrote, "True courage is loving enough to let go. Real miracles are found in wildness, trust, and the willingness to risk your heart. The wild teaches us to be humble, brave, and generous. Every time we act with kindness, we become a part of something bigger, something that echoes across the open land long after we are gone." And at the end, Jessie left a call to action for anyone listening. Anyone who had ever doubted that hope could change the world. If you believe in hope, courage, and the wild heart of America, support wild horse advocacy. Let every act of kindness echo across the land, and never, ever be afraid to let go, because that's when the real miracles begin. The legend of hope and the girl who saw beyond science lived on. Not just in the wild Mustangs that roamed free under the Wyoming sky, but in every person who learned that the greatest kind of love is the one that sets you free.